Guys, before we hop into today's episode of the podcast, I want to tell you about a company I'm partnering with called David Protein. If you're a runner or someone who just wants to stay active, obviously the training you do matters, but to maximize that training, you have to maximize your recovery. And studies show that 30 to 50% of people don't get enough adequate protein in their daily lives. With David Protein bars, you get 28 grams of protein per bar with the added benefit of 0 grams of sugar, 0 gluten, and only 150 calories per bar. David Protein is my go-to because it tastes like dessert, but I'm also getting closer to my protein goal for the day. For me, I've been lifting a lot more recently, so protein is massively important, and David Protein has been my go-to. Give it a try. If you're not fully satisfied with it, shoot me a DM. I will fully refund your order. I've left a link in the show notes. Up your protein, up your recovery, and watch your running flourish as a result. Let's get into today's episode.
Just know that my PR in the mile in high school is slower than the PR pace of my marathon. My marathon PR pace is like 5:29 and my fastest mile in high school was 5:35. So at 18, you cannot expect to be at your ceiling, at your very best. And the fact that you're not, I think, is indicating that you've got a really great potential ahead of you.
That was Dakotah Popehn today on the Running Effect podcast. Guys, this is legitimately maybe my favorite episode of the year, and for two reasons. One, the energy in this conversation, off the charts. Dakotah brings a really joyful energy and perspective, and it's just a really fun conversation. My second reason is we dive into some pretty deep subjects that Dakotah gives some really interesting, good insights and wisdom into. My favorite one that she spoke to was delusional confidence. Part of her story is she was a walk-on to Northern State University in South Dakota, which wouldn't quite match up with placing 12th at the Olympics less than 10 years later. But she dives into how that delusional confidence paid off. We talk about all sorts of subjects in regards to her progression, her journey, how she's accomplished all the things she has in the sport of running. I love this conversation. You guys are going to enjoy it. And after you enjoy it, after you listen to it, share it with a friend, 5 friends, 10 friends. Help us out. Help us spread the word. I know this conversation will impact some people. So be the reason it impacts a friend today. Also hit the follow and subscribe button so you never miss another episode like this one, and give us a 5-star review as the cherry on top. I appreciate you all. I hope you guys are doing amazing and enjoy my conversation with the one and only Dakotah Popehn. Dakotah Popehn, welcome to the Running Effect podcast. How are you doing this afternoon?
I'm doing well. It's a Friday afternoon and most of the mileage is done for the week, so it's kind of all downhill from here.
I love it. At what point during the week can you take a breath and you're like, okay, there's still work to be done, but mentally I'm like, I know I'm good to finish the week on a strong note?
That's a good question. So normally our week is set up with a Sunday long run. So I feel like if I can get through Sunday, it's like I only have one run on Sunday. That feels like the cherry on top. Most days I'm going out for doubles, so it feels like a treat to only have one run. This week is a little different. I did my long run on Thursday, and I have 3 more doubles ahead of me yet. So I'll probably feel good sometime on Sunday about the week being done.
How much of your training are you doing on heavy legs, and how much of your days, what percent of your days would you say roughly is just I don't feel good, but I know I'm strong enough to get through today regardless of how I feel?
Yeah, I'm in the marathon grind right now, and I'm a high mileage girly, so I do 130 miles a week. So every day feels like trash. Every day feels like garbage, and just trying to get through to the hard efforts, trying to take the easy days as easy as possible, so you feel some semblance of speed on the fast days. I had a 26-mile run yesterday. Today's 2 easy runs, but I have 10 by a K tomorrow. So I'm just hoping that I feel 50% for that workout. But yeah, just trying to grind through, and yeah.
What would you say to someone out there who is still trying to figure out the balance of when I say pushing, a healthy sense of pushing, right? If you feel an injury, take a day off, but a healthy sense of pushing. What would you say to someone out there, from an advice perspective of they're maybe in the thick of their own marathon training or heavy base building for track season, and they're in that period right now where, yeah, they don't feel great every day, but they want to maximize their days and push through it. How would you say they should do that as someone who pretty consistently does it yourself?
I think when I'm in this thick of it and just feel like trash, out the door every single day. I remind myself that I'm going to feel like trash in the marathon at some point. It's going to be hard. My legs are going to be heavy and I'm going to be tired and I'm not going to want to keep going. And that's what every single day of this like grind is just getting comfortable with that fatigue, and pushing through healthy fatigue will make the marathon slightly less bad. But at some point, you just have to know that the marathon's going to be bad, and that's what you're preparing for.
How many of these runs that you're doing are solo? And of those runs that are solo, how often do you find yourself daydreaming about like Boston next month, or even Orlando last year, like some of the fun memories, versus just like funny random things to try and get through the run as fast as possible?
Yeah, it's a good question. Right now, I'm at training camp down in North Carolina, so I did have my teammate Annie with me for the first month, but I am now here solo. A lot of people train in the Durham area, it seems. So I've been able to hook up with like the Puma Elite group a little bit. Tristan Colley just happens to have her mom live here, so we met a little bit for my long run yesterday. But if I'm alone, I would say I'm alone maybe 80% of the time. And when I'm alone, I'm almost always dreaming about races that are coming up. I don't often feel like I look back and dream about the races I've had, but I mean, even quite literally this morning, I was thinking about the 2028 trials, and I really would love for Annie and I to make the team, Annie Frisbee, my teammate, and just kind of like dreaming about how we can push each other to make that team together. So I would say I'm dreaming about whatever race is coming up every single day.
You mentioned that like roughly 80% of solitude running. This is a deep question, but I feel like it's one. It might take me a minute to answer it myself. So if you don't have a response off the cuff, totally okay. But I feel like through, that running with yourself, we live in an age of digital media, and we have a phone and a computer and a TV, and like we're always surrounded by stimulus. And for me, I've found that, on my solo runs, a lot of times it's my only alone time with my thoughts. And I think through that, you learn a lot about yourself. Even thought patterns of like, wow, I don't like how my brain resorts to negative thoughts when I'm with myself. So what I'm curious to hear about, what are some things you feel like you've learned about yourself through that time of solitude within your running?
That is a really great question. I honestly just feel like I've realized that I'm quite the dreamer. Like I I didn't really understand that my brain works differently than other people until recently, talking to my husband, who likes to go out on runs himself, but he's constantly trying to like find ways to distract his mind and like think of other things and not be present in the moment of running, I guess. Where for me, like that switch is so easy. Like the moment I'm out the door, I feel like I can put my brain somewhere else very quickly and dream like big dreams. And I didn't really realize that that's not necessarily normal. A lot of people like have to find a way to get out of the run mentally, and that's not me. Luckily, I'm really grateful that I have the ability to almost flip a switch. I'm almost like in Severance. Like I make my outie or my innie do all the work as soon as I go out for a run.
Speaking on that dreaming aspect that you have to yourself, and you mentioned dreaming of like LA 2028, and we're here three years before it. I'm curious to hear about Orlando, which we can get into that race. You make your first Olympic team. Was that something you were dreaming about in 2021, 3 years before it?
Oh, absolutely. Even in 2020 when I ran Atlanta, the trials there, and I placed like 36. I think I ran some like 7-minute miles in that marathon. But I remember finishing and being like, okay, great. This was awesome and such a great learning experience for when I want to make the team in 24. And yeah, I'm going into it. My dad didn't have a passport. So I literally have texts of me being like, you have to go to the DMV. You have to go get a passport application. And he filled out a passport application before I had made that team because I felt just so confident that I could make it.
Oh my gosh, what a story right there. I love that. Off of that, someone once said on my podcast, and this quote kind of went semi-viral. It's hard to define what viral means these days, but a lot of people I think were very receptive to it. It was from Yassine Abdallah. He runs for University of Arkansas now, and he's run one of the fastest times in the 3K and mile in the NCAA history. But he said, something to the extent of sometimes you have to be so confident in yourself that other people think you're delusional. And I think that's so true. It's like only you really know what you're capable of. And when you state those things that you think you're capable of, on paper, it makes sense for people to think you're delusional. Like your dad or someone else could have been like, well, you placed in the 30th at the last trials. Like, to think you're going to place top 3 is a little delusional, but you know the work you put in, you know the thoughts you're having, you know all of the things that go into the belief that you can do that. Could you speak deeper on that confidence and belief aspect, and specifically for a younger athlete out there, how like it can quite frankly make or break your career? Like, what you think is ultimately what you'll embody, and has the biggest ripple effect both within your running but also your life.
Yeah, I hadn't ever heard that quote, and I love it because it is maybe a kinder way of saying, I always say that I'm just dumb enough to believe I can do whatever I put my mind to. So that's kind of a nicer way to put what I always say, I guess. But that ability to just believe is definitely the make or break of somebody who is an Olympian or a sub elite. Because if you've got like, you're gonna have the outside world saying, "Oh, you sure you can do that?" So you have to be so firm in your foundation of knowing that you can do whatever crazy little thing you put your mind to, whether it's running or like moving up in your business or doing whatever like big dream you want. Other people are going to think you're silly or delusional. And I just say, keep your head in the sand. Continue to be dumb enough to think you can do it, I guess.
One of my favorite, it was probably my favorite quote I came across last week. And the quote was, anytime you're going to want to do something exceptional, you're going to have to suffer. And the only way you can suffer is if you believe you can reach it to the other side. And I would have to believe that if we knew we would have a poor race result or a poor result at the end of the day, we probably wouldn't put ourselves through the suffering that we go through to try and give ourselves a shot at that sort of thing. Like, you're probably training so hard and so intently for Boston because you believe you can reach it to the other side of your goals. How crucial do you think it is, just in general, to like put perspective to the suffering that we go through? Because you have that confidence and that belief, but that doesn't mean that the 130-mile weeks you're putting in right now aren't utterly terrible and exhausting and suffering.
Yeah, I mean, I think you have to know that there's going to be a reward. And the hard part about that is like the reward may not be in Boston. Unfortunately, the reward for me happened to be the 2024 trials. I had many bad races before that. If you've ever read the book Atomic Habits, he talks about
Yes.
how
Amazing.
I like the theory of like 32 degrees. Like at some point, all this stuff that you've been doing will reach the melting point and you will have a breakthrough. So I think it's hard because you have to be very patient and knowing that all this hard work I'm putting in today might pay off in Boston, and I hope it does, and I hope I podium or win the race. Like that's the ultimate dream, but it might pay off in Boston 26 or 27. You have to have like a long scope on it too.
Love Atomic Habits. I think it's probably the most impactful book I've ever read. And to that point that he made, he said, complaining about not achieving success despite working hard is like complaining about an ice cube not melting when you heated it from 25 to 31 degrees. Your work was not wasted. It just was being stored. All the action happens at 32 degrees. And I think the disappointing thing in culture is a lot of people sometimes give up at 31 degrees, but they had no clue they were right there.
Yeah. Honestly, that quote gives me chills, and it's what I think about every single day. Every time, like, I don't want to go out for a run. I'm like, I'm at 30 degrees. Like, I got to bring it up one more degree. Or if I have a harsh race, like New York was a really hard race for me in 24. And it's just like, okay, well, I'm at 31 degrees. Like, I'm going to get to 32 degrees at some point, and I'm going to have another breakthrough.
We can get into your backstory and background in a little bit, but for some context, you ran for Northern State University in South Dakota, where you were originally a walk-on. I think someone reads that on a page and thinks, how in the world did she make the Olympic trials in general? And then how'd she make the Olympic team? Did you have the same delusional belief back in the day, or do you feel like it's kind of grown throughout the years?
I think I was pretty delusional in high school also. I never made state. I never won like conference. I think I placed a couple of times in conference, but like back end placing. And I reached out to my college coach and was like, hey, I'd like to continue to run. So again, kind of being a little delusional. Like I didn't really know what it would take. And just kind of believing in myself, saying like, I think I could run for an NCAA program. And luckily he, said I could be a walk-on, and that was amazing. So I gave it everything I had at Northern. And when I graduated, I definitely wasn't thinking like, oh, I'm going to go on to continue running. It did take my coach to step in and be like, hey, I think you could make the Olympic trials in the marathon. And as soon as he said it, I was 100% in, 100% delusional once again. But I really just had no idea that there was like post collegiate running to the level that there is in America. Like, of course, I knew Des Linden and Kara Goucher and Shalane Flanagan, but I didn't realize like there's a whole subset of women below them too who, maybe work a part-time day job and are trying to like go after this big dream. So he definitely opened my eyes to the fact that I could make the Olympic trials, and also I would probably still need to work for a while.
Can you give some reassurance to a high school out there listening who hears that and feels very reassured that I'm not breaking 4 minutes on the mile as a boy in high school. I'm not getting recruited by Oregon and NAU, but I still really want to pursue this running thing. And I still really think I can do big things in the sport. I just need more time. And what would you say to them from your own personal experience and own personal story of like big things can happen if you commit yourself to the sport over decades, literally in your case?
Yeah, it kind of goes back to that 32 degrees again. Like you just might be at 27 degrees right now, and that's okay. And if anything, the fact that you're not popping off in high school probably tells me you could have a very long and healthy career. Just trying to find a place that believes in you as much as you believe in yourself and has like a healthy program that is going to be willing to let you grow. Just know that like my PR in the mile in high school is slower than the PR pace of my marathon. My marathon PR pace is like 5:29, and my fastest mile in high school was 5:35. So like at 18, you cannot expect to be at your ceiling, like at your very best. And the fact that you're not, I think, is indicating that like you've got a really great potential ahead of you.
Let's go back to those early days in the sport. How'd you get started, and what were your first impressions of this thing called running?
The very first memory I have of running was in middle school, like doing the mile. And I would shut my eyes for like 100 meter stretch at a time because I was like, didn't want to be doing it. And when I would I like can remember shutting my eyes and running forward. And then all of a sudden I opened my eyes and I was like leading the class. I was like, oh man, like maybe I'm pretty good at this. But I was a hockey player. I grew up in Minnesota and played hockey growing up and was pretty obsessed with it. And I would say like I was okay at it. I definitely had dreams to make an Olympic team as a hockey player and felt like I could even go. Again, this is me going back to being delusional, as I thought I could make the NHL. Like I thought I could play for the Minnesota Wild as a woman. I was very convinced that I was going to do that. So when I was in high school, though, my mom saw like how wrapped up in running I was, in hockey, and was just like, I think you need to broaden your horizons. Great athletes are great at a lot of things. So if you try something new, it doesn't mean that you're forgetting about hockey. It just is helping you become like a better athlete all around. And I fought her on it. I wanted to only be a hockey player. I wanted to commit basically my life to hockey. But eventually, you do what your mom says at some point. And I went out for running because of those memories. And in middle school, just kind of being like, I normally would win the mile in gym class, and I would win the pacer test. I don't even know if they do that anymore. I just felt like I was kind of a natural endurance athlete. And then I went out for track that freshman year and took last in like every JV meet that there was. And I was like, well, turns out I'm not like that good. Just my classmates don't try.
Was there a flipping the switch moment for you when you were doing running, you were participating within it, but you flipped your mindset and you thought, okay, I'm going to try to put some more effort here. Maybe you started to see some progress and you thought, okay, maybe this running thing is something for me.
Oh, absolutely. I can pinpoint a race, not necessarily that I thought like, oh, I'm going to be really good at this, but just that I was going to dedicate more time. It was at Cambridge. I was running the 800, which I should have never been running to start with because it's way too short. But I was coming down the home stretch in dead last. and just getting like the pity claps. And that like in that moment, I was like, I'm gonna be better at running because I never in my life want to get another pity clap. So it was almost out of like sheer embarrassment that I felt like I was like, okay, I've got to commit more time to running.
At what point do you feel like you truly fell in love with the sport in a way in which you loved it more than you ever loved hockey before?
That's such a good question because I think running kind of has a sneaky way of making you fall in love with it. Hockey was really amazing because it was my first passion, but being a team sport's hard. I was a goalie specifically, so I could only play like my end of the ice. I could have like the best game of my career, but we could still lose because I could only do what happens on my end. And so I just think after some frustrating losses in hockey and just not feeling like I was making that improvement in hockey, even though I was putting in the time, and then looking at running and saying like, oh, I ran all summer and got, X amount seconds faster in cross country this year. It felt so black and white to me that at some point it felt like I was no longer, just doing cross country and track to cross train for hockey. It felt like hockey was just filling my winter so that I could get to track and cross country.
You ultimately end up going off to school, as I mentioned before, at Northern State University in South Dakota. You're a cold weather girl. Let's talk about that first. Where is that in your blood and how do you get through it? I was born in Erie, Pennsylvania, which I think was one of the cities that had the most snowfall in inches out of any U.S. city because of the lake effect. And then I ended up moving to Ohio, and I lived in Texas for a brief part, but now I live back in Ohio and in Columbus, actually, where James Clear lives. So I'm waiting to run into him at a coffee shop or something.
Oh, very
Besides
cool.
the point. Anyways, I hate the cold. So I really want inspiration from you of like, how did you get through it? Because it's brutal.
I hate to say it. I'm actually not a winter girl. I hate the cold. If I'm in like the Midwest in winter, I'm on the treadmill almost every day because I just can't do it. I've been frostbit too many times where it's like, this is getting dangerous at this point. So I am very fortunate that I get to, like right now I'm in North Carolina because winter sucks in Minnesota and they just got like 9 inches of snow. So, I mean, for the people who have to put up with it, you have to I feel like embracing it ends up being the best way to get through it and just saying like, I'm going to go outside and I'm going to run today, even though we just got snow or it's really cold. And then when you do that and you like finish your run, and even though it might have been slower or harder than you wanted it to be, you feel like stronger and grittier for it. And I do think that's why we get so many really strong runners out of Minnesota or the Midwest in general, like Emma Bates, Kellen Taylor, Emily Sisson, Annie Frisbee. Like we're talking Joe Klecker. We have so many people that we've produced. And I think it's because we have to get through such gritty winters.
I also think, I'm not sure to what extent you follow it, but on the high school level at like Foot Locker or NXN, Midwest kids almost always race slower at the beginning of the year because they don't have the fast, like fake grass invitationals that they have in California. So their times are always slower, but they always place remarkably high. I mean, the Foot Locker boys winner, like the last 7 years, I'm going to say 5 of it has come from the Midwest. And I think it's because of that. I think obviously I'm biased, but I think there is something to the Midwest toughness of like, it's not really fun to train for many months out of the year, like truly. And I think you develop such grit.
Yeah, totally. I agree. That's very cool.
I think something I've been reflecting on in terms of that subject with honestly winter, hopefully coming to a close here in Ohio soon and shortly, but like people have talked to me about having, it actually didn't have to do with running, but I'll apply it to running. It was this guy, I was talking to him on the phone and he was talking about this dream he has and how there's really nothing. It's kind of the delusional belief piece that we were talking about, but he's got this dream and there's really nothing to like back him up. And some days he doesn't necessarily like believe if the dream is going to come true. And what I said is that's so natural to have doubts. Every single person is going to have doubts in those hard days where they don't feel like doing the things it's going to take to get them there. But I said the key for an individual, and I think for successful individuals, as I've studied on this podcast, is like your day-to-day, whether you feel very motivated or you have most doubts you've ever had, your work output is the exact same. So like that 10 by K workout you have coming up, you could feel like you're winning the Boston Marathon, or you could feel like you're going to retire from running tomorrow because it's so hard and the splits still look the same because you do it anyways. And I think that's just like so crucial, specifically with the weather here, is like it could snow 10 inches or it could be super sunny, but you need to be the type of individual that's still going to put in the work regardless, because motivation is fleeting, and honestly, so are doubts to an extent. So you have to ride those waves.
Yeah, that's, I mean, super important. I've never thought about it like that. It's like you said, it's if the weather is bad or good, I'm going to go out and run my 10 miles regardless of what happens. And I mean, I might have a good or a bad perspective on it, but you just kind of make it a habit, I guess.
Speaking of that transition to college, a lot of people, I think, struggle with it. I imagine, crossing over the state, correct me if I'm wrong. Sorry to the South Dakota listeners if this is offending, like, doesn't seem like the most exciting state. Take me through that transition. Was it hard, specifically with that running aspect of like also walking on? So it wasn't just like going off to college in a new place, but yeah, also continuing to pursue this running thing and try to prove yourself.
Yeah, it was certainly hard. I think anytime you have a coaching change, whether it is on a college level or post collegiately, if you're just a recreational runner, I think that's always going to be difficult because you're going through a different program all of a sudden. And I'm an only child, quite the mama's, like I am quite the daddy's girl, I guess, and like was really close to my mom. So just being away from home in general was pretty difficult for me. But on the running aspect, I had a harsh first year, I'd say freshman year. I didn't really do much to be proud of at Northern as a runner. It was definitely like a foundational year, and I think I felt discouraged within that year because I had teammates who were doing so well, and I couldn't really figure out like why I felt like I was stagnant that first year. But I'm glad I persevered through it because I do think it takes a minute to like figure out coaching and like how, like letting a coach figure out how to train you, sort of thing. And then luckily, my sophomore year, I had a teammate. Her name is Sasha Gallagher now. It was Hoveen. She qualified for cross country nationals. And coming into college, her and I had the exact same high school splits. Like her mile PR was a 5:35, and so was mine. Like on the second, we had the same exact high school PRs. So when she made cross country nationals, and I was like like 100th or whatever from making it at sections, I was like, oh, like if Sasha can do this, so can I. And so I would guess for like this to be applicable to other people is like looking around you and seeing like who's successful, who's doing like what you want to do, and then just kind of be their shadow. Luckily, Sasha was super kind and generous and was basically like, yeah, you want to do core with me? Come, do 12 minutes of plank with me. If you want to run this workout too hard, to get on the train behind me, kind of thing. She was able to just kind of put me under her wing and help me. Honestly, without Sasha, I don't know that I am the runner I'd be today.
Kind of to close out your career, you placed 6th in the 10K at the 2017 NCAA Outdoor Championships. How crazy was that performance to you, looking back on your first day on campus as a walk-on, emailing your coach, asking for a spot on the team? Did that make it pretty full circle of like, it's pretty insane I even made the meet, much less placing 6th as quite the accomplishment?
Yeah, totally. I mean, I think high school Dakota would have been incredibly surprised and proud of that performance. I had made 5 NCAA meets between cross country and outdoor. And I want to say that was my first All-American. I had a lot of race anxiety with my first few where I felt like I just didn't belong on the starting line kind of thing. So to come away with 6 that year, I could not have been more overjoyed. That's one of those trophies that like I'll never put in a box. That sits on my my shelf behind my desk, and it will for the rest of my life because that's one of the most proud moments I've had of my career.
Do you ever think back to those moments and results where you executed and got it done on the day? Like it's NCAA championships and marathons, and the whole world of running is honestly really difficult where like you have to get it right on the day and you train months for a day. And we might talk about NBA later with your good friend, Anthony Edwards, but like someone like that, right? He's got like 100 games, and if he misperforms one, it's like on to the next, I play tomorrow night. Running's a really brutal sport where like you have to get it done on the day. Do you ever think back to those past performances like that 2017 race and think like, wow, like she was baller. She was something, and I'm proud of her. And that person made me who I am today. And I take comfort and inspiration from that person.
100%. And I think it's important to know, like, that girl getting it done on the day. To get it done on that day, I had to have so many bad races before that, and I had to figure out how to belong on the starting line to get to that point. We are not superhuman. It did not just happen for me. I am not just lucky, and I don't have like issues with confidence and stuff. Like that's all stuff I've worked on. I think that's really important for other people to hear is it's so normal to have race anxiety. It's so normal to be on the starting line being like, what the heck did I get myself into? Or like just have these constant circling negative thoughts. But getting through that and learning how to deal with that will get you on the starting line of the race where you're going to hit it out of the park.
You mentioned the word luck there, and I want to ask you about it because I think a lot of people in society today might see the title Olympian or Puma sponsored athlete and think, oh, she was lucky. She hit the gene lottery, or can assume things about your background, where you went to, and it's like, no, you were a walk on. Like if that word shouldn't be used with a person, it's probably you.
Yeah.
What does that mean to, how annoying does that give you like a chip on your shoulder when people are like, oh, she's lucky?
Yeah, totally. Because I think the people who are lucky are the people who can run 80, 90 miles a week and become an Olympian. I have to grind 100. Somebody just asked me this at a race I did this last weekend. They're like, "You're such a high mileage girl." And I was like, "It's because I have to be." Like I'm not genetically good at this. I was not blessed by being an amazing runner. I've worked really, really hard to get to where I'm at. So by no means would I ever say I've been lucky in this sport.
Totally gonna butcher this quote, but I think I saw something that was like, don't call it luck. I've failed more times than you've tried.
Yes,
So
exactly. I mean, that's really what it is, right? It's just learning over and over and trying to get it right on the right day, basically.
I feel like if you look at your career in each stage, high school, college, early professional, like mid professional, all the way up to where you are today, you've like kind of consistently taken these like leaps and taken the next step. I think a lot of people will, make the jump from walk on to getting a spot on the team, and then getting a spot on the team to performing at NCAAs, and then performing at NCAAs to like doing like moderately well at low key races. And, if I was to keep going down that progression for you, we'd be here for another 2 minutes. So for you, what would you accredit that kind of consistent, like taking a jump every few years or every year too?
I mean, I think that's good coach. A lot of that's good coaching, knowing how to push, how much to push, not getting me to my ceiling too soon, and just being consistent outside of running. I think something I learned quickly is that we all do the same stuff. We all do the same workouts. Everybody does 6 by a mile with 1 minute rest. I'm going to do 10 by K tomorrow. Everybody does that. There's no secret sauce anymore aside from maybe double thresholds, but I'm not quite there yet. So it's like figuring out what's going to put me above other people who are doing the same training as me. So, drinking water throughout the day, making sure I'm optimizing my sleep, eating, fueling correctly, all of that stuff for sure.
Do you ever get anxious at the amount of stuff you could be doing to separate yourself? Like you just mentioned like 4 things, and there are probably a plethora of more that you could come up with.
I mean, there's a million things you can, especially with like science today, like bicarb's another one. Like, what's the perfect mix of doing all the right things? And I think what I found is like doing the right mix of things that's sustainable every single day is what is important. I can't always get 100 grams of protein in a day, but I can aim for 50 or 75 or whatever. I don't even count protein. That's just an example. Or just doing whatever is sustainable and like continues to make you happy. It should not feel like heavy burdened to be doing all these little things. However, you can make them in a habit, going back to atomic habits, is gonna be what's like best for you, I suppose.
Guys, I promise Dakotah and I are not sponsored by James to promote the heck out of that book in today's conversation. But go read it.
Such a good book, though, if you haven't not read it.
Yeah, so good. And I trust that anyone listening has, one, heard me talk about it multiple times on the podcast or just in culture. I think what's so impressive about that book is it's like #1 on the New York Times bestselling list, like literally years after it came out, which I think says everything about it. Something I did want to ask you about earlier was the comparison piece, and specifically how you view it now with social media, where I think for a younger audience out there, which is predominantly who listens to this, but also like a 70-year-old struggles with comparison. It's not subject to one time phase. We all struggle with comparison as human beings. I think it's heightened in the sport of running because everything that everyone does is out there now with Strava and Instagram and TikTok, and you name the app. I'm sure you can find out what someone's doing or compare yourself to that person. Do you feel like you were blessed early on in your own running journey of like, you didn't really know what other people were doing and like what a traditional journey looked like to get to the Olympics, as well as present day? How do you manage those feelings of comparison on something like Instagram where, you know, you can see someone's running 100 miles a week, someone's running 140 miles a week. They ran this time at this race, you know, you could go on.
Yeah, I think I if I'm going to use the word lucky, I am lucky that I grew up in a time where Instagram was certainly a thing. Strava certainly wasn't in high school. Like I didn't get a GPS watch until maybe my fourth year of college. So I guess I just feel like social media wasn't what it is today, where people upload the very best highlights of their life. But you know, dealing with it now, I've certainly been doom scrolling on Strava and been like, oh my God, this girl is so fit. Look at this workout that she did. And look at this race that somebody else performed. And what I have to constantly remind myself is success isn't linear. Like you don't have to do this workout at this pace in order to be an Olympian. You don't have to. In fact, if I copy and pasted myself into somebody else's training, I'll just use like Sarah Hall, for example. If I did her training, it might not be, even if I hit every single split she hit, it might not be as successful for me. So I just have to continue to just trust my coach, knowing that whatever I'm doing is enough. And honestly, sometimes that just means like removing myself from Instagram. If I start to feel like kind of those icky feelings, I'm pretty good about just being like, all right, that's enough of that today. This isn't helpful. This isn't going to help me become a better athlete. So I'm pretty good about monitoring that myself. But if you feel like you're not, then take a break, you know, change your password or have a friend change your password so you can't get into it for a month or 2 weeks or whatever. And just take a break from it because it's not linear.
Let's talk about the special day last February in Orlando. Describe what that day meant to you in the moment and means to you looking back on it.
Oh my gosh. In the moment, it was like my wildest dreams coming true. I could walk to the exact spot on the Northern State University campus where my coach said, hey, I think you can make the Olympic trials in the marathon. And we've joked about it 100 times. Like he never meant, hey, I think you're going to be an Olympian someday. You know, if anything, he was like, I think you can make the Olympic trials, but you should also make sure to have like a 9-to-5 job because this isn't like a full-time gig for you. So it's just crazy to think like where I've come from. And as soon as he said I could make the Olympic trials in the marathon, my brain doesn't stop there. It doesn't say like, oh, if I could just qualify, that would be enough. For me, it was almost immediately like, oh, if I can qualify for the trials, I want to qualify for the team. I want to be an Olympian. So it was the best day of my running career by far. It's everything culminating on the right day. And I mean, now it's amazing that I get to call myself an Olympian for the rest of my life because it, on a business side, it definitely creates some longevity within my career and creates like a better business model for me, thankfully.
You then went on to actually at the Olympics, you came in 12th with a time of 226.4 or 226.44, excuse me. I'm so used to having track athletes on that I'm like in the decimals.
The points.
Yeah, exactly. Would be crazy if I wrote in the show notes your exact decimal. But yeah, 226, hilly course, 12th. Maybe you wanted more, knowing the dreamer that you are after talking to you for 35 minutes. But from an outsider's perspective, pretty darn good performance. A lot of people go to the Olympics and I think for the first time get caught up in the buzz of everything and get to race day, specifically like a marathon, and are completely drained. How did you stay focused and ultimately pull off a really impressive performance?
Yeah. And to be clear, for sure, I'm proud of 12th, but would have loved 10th. And you know what, if I was 10th, I would have wanted to be 5th. And if I was 5th, I would have wanted gold for sure. Like there's there's no way to ever be fully satisfied when you're a very competitive human, and that's just something I should probably go to therapy for. But I feel like I was able to just create a lot of normalcy in Paris. I went out for opening ceremonies, and I just knew that like the Olympic Village wouldn't be my vibe. I would say pretty type A when it comes to marathon training, especially like that last month of training. So I had an Airbnb pretty close to the village that I could kind of come and go as I needed, and just so I could have my own schedule and eat my own food. So I feel like I almost forced it to be more low key by staying outside of the village and just not doing too much. I for sure tried to go and enjoy the experience, like doing opening ceremonies. I went to a night of track, saw a soccer match. But like a week of, I was living a pretty normal life aside from the fact that it was, in Paris, and I was eating croissants and amazing coffee and yeah, and on the whole other side of the world from my normal life.
Take me through meeting Anthony Edwards.
Oh my gosh, it was so cool. He just happened to walk past me, and I panicked because I'm a huge fan. I'm a big Timberwolves fan, and like of him specifically, and he is the reason I'm a basketball fan, because he is such a good he's just such a good showman, I would say. Like he really puts on a show for the fans. And he walked past me, and I was like, I can't bother him. And then I was like, you know what? When am I ever going to be in the same vicinity of Anthony Edwards ever again? So I said, with a shaky voice, sweaty hands, like almost crying, I was like, hey, Ant, I'm a huge Timberwolves fan. I went to every playoff series the year before. And I think he could sense how nervous I was. And he was like, you want to get a selfie? And I was like, oh, like he was as cool as I wanted him to be. They say don't meet your heroes, but you should meet Anthony Edwards if you can. He was super awesome. And I sent that picture to my now husband, and he was like, shut up. He was so excited. He's a huge Timberwolves fan. So yeah, me and Ant are teammates and buddies now. So
I love it. I absolutely love it. Let's do this. Anthony Edwards lines up for a mile. How fast is he running? Peak condition.
Oh, I don't know if he's going any faster than like a 6:30, to be honest. I feel like I think he's gassing pretty soon, right? Yeah, because he could run really fast. Would he know how to, tempo himself out for it? I feel like he'd drop a really hard 400 and then start gassing out.
That's probably very fair. It goes out in like 70 and then just like taps out. So
yeah, totally.
Well, there's long been this discussion of, can LeBron James break 5 in the mile? I'm adamant that he can't. I don't care how. They're too big.
He's too big of a human, I think. Yeah,
exactly. Well,
the better question is, do you think that Taylor Swift would beat Travis Kelce in a 5K?
Oh, yes, because doesn't she run a ridiculous amount? That's what I've heard.
Yeah, she does run a lot. That's like, we always argue about it as a team. I think Taylor Swift wins there.
Oh, for a 5K for sure. A mile, I still think she beats him. I think the probably middle ground is like an 800, but I don't know. Not to talk about body types. You can be successful with many different ones in the sport of running, but she kind of looks like a runner. Like she looks like she could move.
Yeah, and like you said, no shame, but like Travis Kelce is just holding on to like extra muscle that will make it harder.
He's clearly a tight end. I've never heard that one. That's a good one. That's super interesting.
Oh man, I argue about it with my husband constantly.
Really? Does he think Travis Kelce?
Yeah, he does. He really does, because he's an NFL player, so yes, he's athletic, but he's not a 5K-er.
Yeah, what NFL players are really gifted at is like their, I don't even know the scientific word, but I would deem it as like anaerobic push multiple times throughout an hour. And yeah, he could cook her in any sort of like fast sprint, or like if they were doing something like a pacer test, even maybe, because it's like really tailored endurance. Even when I'm in like peak running shape and I play pickup basketball, like it's a different kind of tired. But a 5K is way too long. Taylor would destroy him. Like, I don't even think it would be close.
I don't think it would be either. All right, I'm happy you're on the Taylor wagon.
Yes, I'm fully on the Taylor Swift wagon. Okay, Dakotah, wrapping up this conversation, what do you feel like you'd have to accomplish in the rest of your career to feel fulfilled and feel like you left a good legacy in the sport?
I am going to be honest. I think if I had to retire tomorrow, I'd be happy with this career that
Good.
I have put
Love it.
together. I like to be as mentally healthy with this sport as possible as I can be, no matter what. Even if I win Boston or New York or an Olympic gold, there's always going to be things I would have wanted more from. So I feel like I'm okay with just being happy with what I have done, knowing that I've been very blessed in this sport, 100%. And I've done things that a lot of people can only dream of. And I always say, like, if I can just have a positive impact on this sport, like, that's really all I want. I want to leave the sport better than I found it. And I hope that I've done that in my career.
You certainly have. And as you said, I think that is the healthy perspective to have. And I wouldn't judge you if you said the opposite, but I'd probably think in the back of my head, like, I hope she comes to peace with how darn impressive she is and the fact that she made an Olympic team, and that'll go down in history. So, Dakotah, final serious question for you. For those who have listened to our conversation, look up to you, all that you've accomplished, what would be, can be anything on your heart. What would be the final takeaway message that you want to leave with people finishing up their runs, taking out their AirPods? What do you want them thinking, going back into their everyday life?
I want them to just be dumb enough to think that they can do whatever they want to do. That's really what I always tell people. The other quote was probably better and kinder, but just be dumb enough to think you can do it.
You should put that on like a singlet or a shirt and sell it.
Yeah.
Be your motto. Dakotah, final question for you. The question I ask every single guest on every single podcast. If you had Gordon Ramsay coming over to your house for dinner, what would you choose to make for him?
Oh, I have to make it for him?
You do. Chef Dakotah. Switching
God.
professions.
I'm pretty good at making salmon. I could make a pretty good salmon, I think. Actually, the way I make salmon is what I saw him do on Food Network once.
Ooh, okay.
Hopefully he would appreciate it then.
Yeah, if he complains, you can be like, this was your recipe, dude. Like, I learned from you. You suck. I don't suck. Well, Dakotah, thank you so much for this conversation. Truly mean this. And if you don't believe me, you can go back and listen to my other conversations. I don't say this every single podcast. You were such a joy. This was so much fun. So much fun, one, but also I learned a ton. I think you have such depth that you don't always see within the running space. So thank you so much for your raw honesty and insights and stories and joy that you brought to this conversation today. Truly one of, if not my favorite, I've done so far this year. So keep crushing it, and best of luck in Boston next month and beyond.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me on.